Okay, cool. So, um, I'm Carlo. I've been in the industry for about 4 years here in Montreal, but my background was in community nonprofit, and my studies and university, my major is in history. So I have a different way of viewing, how we interact with the concepts of financial planning. I often have a bit of skepticism, and so from you, I assume having, I don't mean skepticism in the whole thing, but I mean in what I hear from a lot from our industry. From your end, you're an academic in financial planning. Can you go ahead and just give me a short introduction to yourself, and uh, and then we'll start with a question. So,
Perfect. So I am Dr. Colin Slabach. I launched the Masters in Financial Planning program at New York University about 2 years ago. And I have a PhD in personal finance from Texas Tech University, as well as a CFP and several other designations as well. Yeah, I was at the American College for 3 years.
mhm,
I worked in the Retirement Income Certified Professional, RICP designation,
yeah.
which focuses exclusively more on retirement distribution rather than accumulation.
hmm Wow. Yeah, because that's actually one of the hardest things. I find that in the world of retirement, of let's say personal finance, everyone talks about, oh, you can reduce your fees here, you can increase your savings here, the latte effect, which again, I engage that with a lot of skepticism. I don't know if you remember that one, where they're like, oh, if you just take the $5 that you would have spent on the latte, and you save that for 30 years, you'd retire a millionaire, right? But we forget that there's also the decumulation phase, which is kind of like akin to climbing Mount Everest. It's actually easier to climb Mount Everest than it is to come down, as most deaths actually occur on the way down, not actually on the way up. So, is financial planning kind of like that for the decumulation?
Yeah, I don't take my coffee in the morning. I need my coffee. I'm not a huge big Starbucks drinker, but if you look at the Starbucks earnings, it keeps going up. So I think the idea that people need to forego something now in order to accumulate assets to pay for a future is 100% correct.
Mhm.
But to specifically attack someone's values, whether that be a $5 coffee in the morning that they really need, I think is fairly inappropriate. You just
Mhm.
have to understand that there are trade offs, and the process of budgeting is really saying, well, what can I afford now,
Mhm.
and then still be able to fund whatever goal I want in the future.
Yeah.
As for asset decumulation, I think it's way harder. Asset decumulation is way harder than asset accumulation, both psychologically and economically. It's a very different process. And you're right. You are looking at a pool of money and you're saying, I need this until the day I die. And the part of the problem is you don't know when you're going to die.
Mhm.
And there's also probably going to be some spending variation along the way. We see a lot of people who spend a very reasonable amount during the early, or what we like to call the go go years. And
Mhm.
near the end, their spending continues to decline, but medical bills drastically increase. One of my areas of research that I enjoy looking at is actually the first to die principle.
Yeah.
So women are much more risk than men of being in poverty. And it's primarily because their husbands are passing away. And we talk about the economic principle of two people's expenses don't double when they live together. Well, now you've lost the spouse. You've spent a lot on the medical bills.
Mhm.
You've spent a lot on the funeral. So you have depreciated amounts of assets. And then you've also got this filing single on your taxes. And also your expenses are not cut in half.
Yeah.
And this really, really puts women at a much greater risk in retirement than men.
Do you find that also part of that risk is maybe due to the lifelong earnings gap between men and women? Let's say and go into traditional genders of that of like the difference in earning power from men and women.
So definitely, especially for those single. So if you are single, male or single female, you're much more likely to end up in poverty just because of that economies of scale of having two versus one. I would also agree with that statement. I would also take it a little bit further. I think society in the United States is looking at a male and saying, you are the governor of the finances. Now, I know that has changed a lot, but we're talking about individuals who are retired
Hmm.
and who are probably approaching the end of their life. So there is that legacy of that. And so there's a lot of unknowns. And
Yeah.
I think it's led to a lot of elder abuse as well
Mm.
among the women. So I just think quite a bit of different things that are happening there, as well as women are retiring younger. But the nice thing is, in the United States, you see the Social Security. So the larger of the two Social Security checks does stick around. And if you view the household as one economic unit, it may not be as bad as some appear, but there are these other kind of psychological nuances that are can be incredibly damaging that I don't really think show up in the value proposition that an advisor can provide, but
Hmm.
it is there. It won't show up in dollars and cents, but I
Yeah.
guarantee the client will definitely appreciate it.
That's something that I find very important when I deal with clients. So I run kind of two options of business. One is the traditional AUM, and the other one is the fee for service side. And in regardless of what that engagement will be with the client, I find that if they're in a couple, let's say a committed couple. I often find that that in most times it's always like, as you mentioned, one is the governor of the finances, and that's a person you're going to engage with more. But I always make it a point to engage with both of them, to have them both there. And if one is not there, they will always get the summary of the meeting and kind of the action items so that they understand what's going on, what's happening. And I find that in many couples, there seems to almost be a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like they forget that they're in the same boat, even though they seem to always pretend like, oh, we're splitting things 50-50. Oh, well, and what's mine is mine and what's hers is hers. And we just kind of share in the middle. And it's like, yeah, but what happens if what if you divorce just before retirement? What if you die in retirement and so on and so forth? What's going on there? And it seems to kind of like be a blind spot in a lot of couples. Is that really, am I just imagining things? Or is that actually kind of, is there any studies that show that, there's kind of like, oh, the big, what? I'm a surviving spouse, and
Yeah.
we forgot to kind of plan what happens.
Well, the nice thing is an advisor has a fiduciary responsibility to the couple. So
Mhm.
you've got a household client. So you have a fiduciary responsibility to both of them, and the second to die person is just as important, if not more important, than the first to die. And the nice thing is, most people don't want to see their spouse slip into poverty once they pass away. It's not a good experience.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone really goes into on their deathbed wishing that upon their spouse. There may be some vengeful people who do, but that's
I
outside of the scope.
I have in my lifetime have
um,
heard of interesting cases from my parents' family friends where one passed away.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, where one passed away relatively young, left a spouse, and instead of the reason why they never took life insurance was because they couldn't imagine that person marrying someone else with, and having happiness. I was like, wait, what? Luckily, I was very young when it was later on and years later when I heard that story from my parents. I was like, whoa. So maybe someone is out there like that. Um, yeah.
that would be a very interesting situation. I think that would definitely be out of the scope of something I could teach in a classroom. That firmly falls into the advisor space of the unique situation, which are fun to deal with. I think that it is a fun aspect to deal with. Various different intricacies of the human psychology, and then trying to apply it to money is just sometimes it gets a little acidine, but other times it's just kind of an interesting situation. Um, I always find it really interesting. Japan
Hmm.
has the very opposite approach of the United States, where the husband does traditionally work mostly outside of the household,
Hmm.
but he provides all of the finances to the wife. And
Mm.
this is a very deep seated tradition in Japan where she manages the money
Yeah.
and she gives him an allowance. And I think that's a very, very interesting aspect. Your goal is to go and produce, and my goal is to manage the
Wow.
household.
And you
And I find that to be completely intriguing.
and
Go
you
ahead.
that's intriguing. Yeah, as you said. But do you find that that even though the male, the well, the breadwinner, let's call it that, is working, and you said gets an allowance from his wife? Do you find that that's actually something that's kind of happening in the world today now that women are slowly making more than men? I'll be honest, I'm in an asymmetrical household where my wife makes more than I do. And no matter how successful I become as an advisor, I'm never going to probably catch up with her. So, do you find that in today's world, as that's changing in asymmetrical households, is kind of being flipped? That there is more care to the other? Are men kind of saying like, wait a minute, I need an allowance, or I should manage the money? What do we find in the U.S.?
So typically, you find one person is managing the money.
Hmm.
One is usually someone who's falling in the money vigilant category or is forced into the role. They may not be a money vigilant person,
Hmm.
but they're forced into the role because someone has to do it.
Hmm.
You have a budget, whether you just spend and you don't know it, or you don't, or you do have one, or you're sticking to goals and things. It's just someone is forced into the role. An interesting dynamic is the rise of that dual income household. I always find it very, very intriguing households who like to separate their money because in a divorce, it may be, if you have a very, I guess, okay divorce where everyone's okay separating assets, maybe there
Hmm.
is some way to easily separate the assets. But you are a household and you are both contributing to the household. And just because one person is making more money doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have at least a legal right. I also think perhaps morally and ethically to
Hmm.
their income as well. Someone has to raise the kids. Someone has to raise the kids. Someone has to do the cleaning, all of these things. Now you may pay someone to do those things,
Yeah.
but it is a household income and bringing the money into the marriage from a legal standpoint, both are entitled to it. Um, Whether you decide to psychologically separate it or not,
Hmm.
I find the separation to be complete separation. I think is a problem,
Hmm.
but you could do some minor separation. So perhaps your wife likes, I don't know, maybe she likes concerts or shoes or something else that is something that you would never spend that amount on,
Hmm.
but you kind of she carves out a portion of her income, maybe as a percentage
Yeah.
that she is going to spend on those luxury goods or luxury things because that is what she enjoys. I think that's completely healthy as well.
Hmm.
But I also think you should be able to do that as well. And perhaps it's based on a percentage. So if she earns more income than you, then she would have a higher budget from that standpoint versus your percentage may be the same, but from a dollar and cent standpoint, it's a little less.
Yeah, we have here in Quebec, because Quebec is even specific in culture to and society to the rest of Canada and North America. But in Quebec, the rhetoric is always like, oh, every couple, the progressive thing is 50-50. But we find that pro rata, as is kind of like it's proportional to incomes, is very popular as well. And then even then, I would say about a good 40 to 50% actually just do everything in the same pot and kind of spend, kind of like so everyone makes the same one. No one, there's no separation. So, but that's very true. That's actually a good way to look at it. However, I find that when someone, let's say, is an artist, and then their spouse is an engineer, for example, that pro rata spending can also be kind of problematic if that person is only making so much. And so, 10% out of, let's say, $60,000 is $6,000, whereas 10% out of $100,000 is $10,000. So the paratas can, in many ways, be a way of looking at, what's the word? Not equality, equity, but maybe not fully if we don't factor in that lower income spouses like work that they do in the home, so on and so forth. So, is there any in the U.S. Is there any kind of studies looking at spending in households?
Yeah, so there's difference between equality and then equitable.
Hmm.
So you're right. If you are married to the starving artist type, there is going to have to be some adjustments.
Yeah.
But those conversations should definitely take place pre-marriage. So
Hmm.
those conversations should definitely take place pre-marriage, and the higher income individual needs to know what they're getting into. I think there definitely needs to be someone looking at the skeletons in the closet, both probably financially and psychologically,
Yeah.
before you do commit to someone. Um, from a spending perspective, at least here in the United States, a lot of kind of daily household spending is still primarily done
Hmm.
by the wife in the household. It has been shifting slightly, especially with the work from home, which has benefited more men than it has women.
Mm.
So we're starting to see a slight shift in that as well, of men having more decision making. I would say Target. So Target is built for women. It used to be. Target was like, how do we compete with Walmart? How do we compete with all these Kmart
Yeah.
back in the day?
Yeah. That was
How
the
do we
thing.
compete with yeah. How do we compete with all of these low cost individuals or low cost providers of groceries and everything else?
Hmm.
And Target was like, well, we want people who are not price sensitive,
Yeah.
and it is women who are pregnant to young children is one of the least price sensitive times in an individual's life. You're
Because yeah,
tired.
you want to
We've
give,
got kids.
yeah, you're tired. You just want to get the thing, and also you want the best for your kids. If anything, So it's like you just you're not price sensitive. So Target actually worked on that. Like they focused on that.
So that was their business model.
Hmm.
Yeah. So Target's business model back then, now they've evolved. So this is probably, gosh, probably 15 years ago.
Hmm.
They said, and if you go, I mean, I love asking students in the class, how many of you shop at Target and how many don't. And if you look at it, it'll be, I don't know, 80% of the females will raise their hand, and then probably less than 15% of the males. And that is because Target is targeting women,
Yeah.
it's not targeting men.
Yeah.
And they understand that the demographic of who's spending in the household and
Hmm.
who's spending those kind of general daily household purchases to kind of also, I would call it, I don't know, design purchases. Like if you're buying a new pot or a pan or something like that, or
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe like a decorative bowl or something you're going to put in the living room, versus they're not looking to sell you a washing machine, because in a washing machine, that's a dual
Yeah,
conversation
yeah.
of,
That's a
hey,
choice
let's go
between
shop.
two. That's
So that it's an interesting, you still see it to this day. Now you're seeing more purchases being made by the male. Now, again, I'm talking everyday purchases.
hmm.
Usually, when you're going out, I love the Christmas commercial where it's like, "Honey, I bought you a car,"
Yeah.
and the wife comes out and she's like so excited. And I think like how unrealistic and how acidine is that commercial? Like if someone like the wife walks out and sees this car, she's gonna, if she knows anything about the finances, she's gonna be like,
You bought
"What
a
the
car.
heck are you doing?"
Yeah, we're already
Um,
in debt.
Most of the cases. So it's an interesting commercial, but they seem to be consistently doing it. But yeah, it's kind of funny. But the big purchases is very a dual aspect.
Yeah.
But from the small daily purchases to groceries and everything else, it's still primarily leaning towards the wife.
Okay. Wow. I in my household, and I've seen behavioral studies kind of bring up this example, is that in my household, my wife, who is makes like 5 times more than I do in a year, is just she comes from a different mindset and culture and everything of kind of precarity, and so she can't go out and buy herself the cashmere sweater. Like I actually have to go do that for her and say, hey, look, I thought of you and whatever, because she'll never do it on her own. So it's kind of funny because the car commercial, I think, is an extreme, but I find that in everyday, or let's just call it, once in a while kind of shopping, the lower income spouse can do often does that, or the higher income, regardless, one spouse does that for the other because of these interesting, biases that people have in their lives. The car is insane, though. I mean, like no one's going to get into an argument about a sweater, but a car, yeah, that seems asinine.
Well, and I would, you could in an aspect purchase a car, but it's always as like a percentage of income. So
Mhm.
perhaps someone is making $1 million a year, they just buy their wife a car,
Yeah,
and perhaps it's a Volvo or whatever. And so it's not, it's, we're talking 3% of their annualized income.
yeah,
That may be more reasonable. But if you're talking someone who's making $100,000 a year, they're probably not going out and buying their wife a car. Now, maybe some surprise,
yeah,
but there may be some aspect behind the scenes, like she needs a new car. Kind
yeah.
of had this conversation, and
The
then
the
there's the
need was
surprise.
there. They talked about the
Um,
need. They hadn't made the choice. Perhaps he went a little bit out of his way to get like a Volvo instead of a Toyota, which is, marginally more expensive. But so I have a question for you.
yeah,
Maybe it's
yeah.
a sensitive one. I know it's not really like personal. Don't worry. But in the sense of that, in this business, we have we have financial planning as an academic study. We know, I think, from the history is that it didn't start that way. It was kind of viewed as a way of how we can kind of add more services and sales to a client, to a household. But we've seen the rise, thanks to you and other doctors out there, of empirical, of viewing it as an academic field of study. And in that sense, do you find that there are kind of divergence? Is there a divergence between financial planning, the academic world, and financial planning, the implementation, but also we have a bit of a profit motive? Is there somewhere where there's a divergence between those two?
It's important to understand how young this profession is. I think that is one aspect. There were a group of people who just didn't want to be called brokers or insurance salesmen anymore. They
Mhm.
wanted to become financial planners. In the United States, we've now exceeded over 100,000 CFPs, and I still don't think it's enough. I think
Mhm.
you could double the number of CFPs and there would still be more room for growth. And that's not including the rest of the world, because the United States has the most.
Yeah.
Um, So it is a developing profession primarily because of how young it is. I always like to say we're probably like 50, 60 years behind accounting. Um, and accounting has evolved
Yeah.
and it's still evolving. So academia is playing a catch up in two aspects. One is training the next generation of financial planners. Texas Tech, where I went, we actually take courses on how to set up financial planning programs and how to pitch it to a university. Now, fortunately, NYU was looking to launch one of their own, so I didn't have to pitch it.
Okay.
But you have to know how to set these up
Hmm.
and produce the next generation of financial planners and train them how to be comprehensive financial planners and not salespeople. There is a sales aspect to it.
Hmm.
I would say if an advisory firm is trying to grow and they're not spending at least 30% of their time on growth and 10% of their budget on marketing, or 10% of their revenue on marketing,
Hmm.
they're really not um, they're not really focused on growth. They're focused on doing other things.
Yeah.
But so we have to grow this profession of highly educated individuals who know how to be comprehensive planners, know how to immediately come into your firm and say, "Oh, I've used six of these 15 different softwares that you've used, and I know how to build this comprehensive plan,
Hmm.
and I want to accelerate and become an advisor, start as a paraplanner, and work my way up rather rapidly."
Hmm.
The other aspect is the research side.
Yeah.
So the research side, it's amazing how many things sparked as an idea from an advisor, and then an academic's like, I didn't really think of it that way. So you see a lot of researchers very, very much focused on application based
Hmm.
in financial planning. We do have some wonderful theories, and theories, I think a lot of people like to bash theory, but theories are a fundamental aspect of an outcome, but they're usually like five, six levels deep.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
can look to a theory and then say, like, oh, this is why someone's acting this way because of the theory.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting to watch people bash theories because they say, "Well, I do this," and it's like, "Well, you do it this way because of this." So there is has to be that bridge between the two, and then we also need to understand that financial planning is so focused on regulation and changes,
Hmm.
um, and so it has to evolve really rapidly. And then academics need to be part of the conversation because we need to be able to say, what is this impact of this regulation going to happen from multiple levels deeper. Usually you'll see someone who will be a statistician at the government or something, and they'll say, well, here's the numbers.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense, but what is the psychological impact that's going to affect all of these things? Um, so it's a huge opportunity from an academic standpoint and a research. And there has been a lot of development. I think retirement income planning, there's been tremendous progress,
Hmm.
at least here in the United States. But when you
Yeah.
then transfer over to Canada or another nation, some things become less applicable. But then there's also the volatility. Canada is actually one of the few nations that's been blessed with less volatility,
Yeah. That's.
whereas if you go to Europe, it's more volatile than the United States,
I thought it was
at least their stock
I,
markets.
I,
Yeah.
I think some of the research, maybe it was from Dr. Wade, had said Canada is like the one of the few other countries where maybe like the 4% rule could kind of work just because it's not too it's not historically volatile. But yeah, I think it works better in Canada than in the U.S. Now, I'm not going to go into the 4% rule. It's not a rule. Let's stop making.
Well, it's our brains. We love cheap shortcuts.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
love cheap shortcuts, and a 4% rule is a wonderful cheap shortcut.
yeah. That's
And
true.
the problem with that is it's based on the United States,
Hmm.
and the United States has seen much more stable over a long period of time than a lot of other nations.
Yeah.
I also think it's kind of acidine to look at, say, I want to create a fixed stream of income that adjusts for inflation, and I want to do it from this incredibly volatile asset where
Portfolio.
is like if you're a consumer and you say, "Oh, the market's dropped 40%." What do consumers do in 2008? Well, they spend less.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
kind of a natural thing, and it's like, well, that 4%, you can keep spending, and so I think this kind of flooring ceiling approach where people increase their spending or
Mhm.
various other tactics is a much more readily aligned, and there also was some key assumptions that happened in Bill Bangan's paper. I
Mhm.
was like to say because if you speak to, I actually haven't ever spoken to Bill Bangan myself, but I've you know heard him multiple times, podcasts and various other things. He will say a lot of different stuff about the 4% rule.
Mhm.
That it's like this is not a rule. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't the one who came up with the rule. Yeah, well, it's interesting. So that's another thing that I love to look at is personality traits
Mhm.
and their investment style.
Yeah.
Um, the thing that makes you incredibly, incredibly competitive makes you an awful, awful investor. It's kind of funny. If I told you you can't beat the S&P 500, most people don't after fees,
Hmm.
you've made it big, why waste your time doing all these things, trying to chase all this returns, all this stuff? Like an NBA player is like, well, I'm the exception throughout my entire life. I was
Hmm.
the exception in middle school, and now I was the exception in high school. I was the exception in college.
Yeah.
Most people said they weren't going to make it in the NBA. Now I'm in the NBA. And we see a lot of NFL players. But then also the other aspect of it is you look at Tom Brady. Well, Tom Brady has lots of streams of income and lots of money.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're coming out of school and you're trying to compete with Tom Brady,
That's
you're going to lose that fight. Like
yeah.
you're not going to win that, and you're trying to keep up with Tom Brady when you don't have Tom Brady level income and assets. And
Hmm.
so that competitive nature that has made you such a great athlete and that natural talent is now not transferable over to investing. And we've seen a
Yeah.
lot of NFL players go bankrupt because of that.
Hmm. A real world question, and one that I think applies to more people more often as we go forward into longevity as an issue. So I have now I live in Canada. I'm actually American. My father's in the States, and he's 81 years old, wonderful health, takes care of himself. Comes from a family where I remember his mom died like 2 weeks short of 100, and even like his brother, who does not take care of himself whatsoever, is like 85 and still in better shape than I've seen people in their 50, in their 60s. So we're at a point. He sold his business, he sold his properties and everything, and then the idea was, well, look, I don't do the U.S. I'm going to put it with someone else, but we should look into annuities, right, as a way to. And so in doing kind of the math, it's like it makes sense for a person like him, but he is psychologically unable to kind of say, wait, I give you $200,000, and if I die tomorrow, that doesn't go to my family, right? Do you find that annuities is something that more and more people can benefit from, but we're not there yet in our brains?
So an annuity is a strategy. There is the probability based versus the safety first.
Hmm.
And you have to view it. I know a lot of people, if you're in a probability based investment world, you typically don't like annuities. And if you're on the insurance side, you love annuities and you hate the probability based. When you focus on safety first, you're giving up some upside
Hmm.
of that asset. Okay, now you could offset and actually get higher upside because you take more risk elsewhere because you now have a income floor. So you could offset it with other assets that could lead to a higher
A higher return.
probability of higher lifetime spending or end account balance, however you want to go
Hmm.
about it. So it's important to understand that when you are purchasing an annuity, unless you're living excessively long, it is foregoing upside.
Hmm.
On average, the person will forego upside. Those who are living very much longer, you're 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 going to benefit from what's called a mortality credit. Those who are dying younger are going to subsidize your longer.
Yeah.
So if your father lives to age 120, in an annuity with all of his assets was a wonderful investment.
Yeah.
But if he lives to age 83, he's then subsidizing those who are living much longer.
Hmm.
I always like to say the probability based approach people, they may not mind an annuity, and you may also want to look in perhaps like a fixed time frame.
Hmm.
So I would say like the income, we always like to see income coming in, like that paycheck syndrome. I went my entire life earning a paycheck. Now I have a pool of assets that I just pull from.
Hmm.
Well, if you could do like a 5 year fixed annuity, doesn't matter whether he dies, whether he lives to 120, you could just do like a 5 year fixed annuity that produces a stream of income for the next 5 years for him.
Yeah.
He may be willing to do something along those lines. I would also perhaps explain that you may be able to take more risk in your other assets because we've locked in this base of income.
Hmm.
So we know that you'll be paying all of your bills until the day you die, and perhaps we'll set some aside for end of life medical types of expenses. But for this other pool of a little bit of money, this is money that he can go, I don't know what he likes to do. Maybe he likes to go on vacation or
Yeah.
whatever. If the market's way up, this is our vacation money, and we're perhaps going to Europe. If the market's down, maybe we're just sitting on the beach somewhere reading a book, and not, spending as much money.
Yeah. It's
So,
true.
understanding the trade-off is very, very apparent. You can do a lot of things if he is very, very anti-annuity.
Hmm.
You could do similar things, perhaps using a bond ladder, or various other things that could kind of act similar to annuity. I always like to say Social Security is the greatest annuity you'll ever buy.
It's true. It's very
So
true.
I'm assuming that Canadian Social Security is also very wonderful. So perhaps if there's some way that he can delay from that aspect. Oh, he's already in his 80s, so that's probably over.
Yeah.
I There are different things you can do. He's not going to capture the mortality credits of that he lives really long.
Hmm.
One of the things I would actually work through an exercise is say, here is the average person your age. Here's how long they're going to live. Now let's do one of these. Actually, there's like 4 or 5 I could send you afterwards of wonderful mortality. Like, how long am I actually projected to live, and what is
Hmm.
the percentage chance that I do live to this age? And that may give him a little bit more of an incentive. But
Yeah.
then you could also do from an annuity perspective, like, here is the return on investment. Here's the IRR
Yeah.
of this stream of payments if you live to this age. If
And
you
kind
live
of
to
the
this
break even,
age.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Like, here's your break even point. I actually don't like to do break evens. I'm not a fan of a break even, just in the essence that it just makes it so salient. Like, oh, I have to live this long to break even. I like to say, like, okay, here's the investment return. And then I also, perhaps it could be a bond replacement. So
Hmm.
here is your bond. It's not going to compete with stocks, but it could
No.
compete with some bonds.
Yeah.
Perhaps maybe not now, with bonds
But
having
also
such a
you
high
don't.
rate.
But
But if
also
you
you don't
look at
have
it
the market risk.
historically,
Yeah. But you don't have the market risk of bonds either. So it's true, bonds are better, but there is also a risk. I mean, not as that there is there is volatility even with them, even though it's not it's not equities. It's not equities, but definitely an annuity, any pension, right, is not going to have that same level of what do you call it? But it's a safety first approach, right? So they're not going to have that volatility. No, no, that's actually really interesting because now I have to call him and tell him, Dad, I think you should still look into it, and here's why. I spoke to Dr. Colin Slabach, and so
well, if he comes to that conclusion, he absolutely refuses. It's his money, so
of
he has
course,
to
yeah.
live with the decisions that are made.
Hmm.
Um, so I would frame it, and I would say, I just want you to have all of the information, and then I will respect your decision.
Hmm.
And then my goal is to operate within those limitations that you put me in. You put me in the box. I've explained the entire landscape, and now you're putting me in this box, and I'm going to do everything that I possibly can. I've had similar situations
Hmm.
with a client who, I'm from Central Illinois, Caterpillar country, so the big
Yeah.
has
I
big
wasn't
excavators and
thinking a little.
everything.
I wasn't thinking a
Yeah,
little.
yeah, not the butterflies. The big excavators,
Yeah.
and someone just refused to sell their Caterpillar stock. They worked there, huge concentrated position,
Hmm.
refused to let me sell. It was inherited from dad. This is memorial type thing. Dad wouldn't want me to do it, and I had to live within that box of constraints.
Mm.
And so you have to understand that there is some things that are bigger than money, and a lot of things are too. And so
Hmm.
you've got to live within that box of constraints. And we are in the people business,
Hmm.
and people do things suboptimally, and we have to optimize things that may not make sense to others, but make a lot of sense to these people. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's their values. It's their money, and
Yeah.
we've got to figure those things out. Which is an incredibly different approach than here's an annuity. Go out and sell this annuity to everyone, or
Yeah.
bring all these money in, and we have to get it in our model portfolio. It's a very, very different. We're in a human business, and that is the wonderful aspect of it.
Mhm.
Is we help optimize in these constraints that people put us in.
Yeah, and you, so we met. I think we met with another gentleman, Aravind. I'm not going to mention his last name because that's hard. I've never been able to say it. At the at the Edge, and we also later met at the roundtable discussion with Diana Cabrisis, and she was talking about how, how to use seminars in a more educational approach, to attract leads. From your end as an academic, have you ever seen any seminars in your own experience, or and say like, okay, that's good, but no, is there are there things where you've seen kind of like best practices and bad practices, not in terms of marketing, but in terms of like, all right, here's what financial planning is, and here's what sales is, and they don't always see eye to eye when it comes to something like a seminar or a product design or anything like that.
Yeah, what it boils down to, and people see a lot of success, is selling the value,
Hmm.
selling an outcome, selling a value. And that can be really difficult in financial services. And so there's the sales individuals who perhaps may talk to 100 people and get one or two.
Hmm.
Then there are people who sell a value who may talk to 100 people and get five. Where you see this kind of next iteration is what's that burning thing in your mind? You showed up to this webinar, you showed up to this event, this seminar, and what is this? Why are you here?
Yeah.
And a lot of people will say, "Well, I got to file for Social Security here. I'm 62 years old, and or I'm about to be 62, and I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. I keep getting this stuff in the mail, and this is what's concerning me." And if you look at Social Security in isolation, it's going to be completely different. But if you can open up
Hmm.
and almost explain all of these different aspects of Social Security, and perhaps assets could be a bridge from 62 to 70, because Social Security is a fantastic investment
Yeah.
that's it's mispriced. So what if we do that? Or what happens if you work a few extra years? Are you wanting to go part time? How does that affect your Social Security?
Hmm.
Various things. If you can just explain all of these things, someone will say, "Oh my gosh, there is much more to this. I just thought I was going to have to file, and I wanted someone to help me file."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's a value proposition. And I think you're going to see a lot of people, even if it's now, again, it's maybe you may have four people file their Social Security and one of them will become a client. But
Hmm.
that's a huge different marketing funnel than someone saying, "I've got 10,000 mailers going out to clients. I've got 100 people signing up, 50 people showing up to the seminar,
Yeah.
25 having a follow up meeting." And then I get,
And one client. Yeah.
I don't, yeah, yeah. And then you get like five clients. But
Yeah.
those five clients might have, if you say $5 million at a 1% fee, well, then you've made $50,000, and the
Hmm.
mailer it was a wonderful investment for you, because that AUM is going to be reoccurring revenue.
Yeah.
Even if you lose money the first year,
It just keeps
it may
going.
be well worth it in the long run. So that's kind of, you always, I think advisors sometimes fear rejection.
Yeah.
Like, this person doesn't understand my value. Ah, oh, it hurts my feelings. That's fine.
Yeah.
Like, you should just be like, I don't know, go ask 100 girls out and get rejected by all of them, because all you really need is one to
Yeah,
go on that
I'm
date.
I'm
And
five
so I
three,
think
so I'm five
advisors
three,
from
so
that
rejection
perspective struggle.
is my thing. Yeah, so I'm used to rejection.
Hey, it worked for you and your wife.
Yeah,
It sounds like
worked
you're
well.
doing pretty well for yourself.
So I would say last question, and because I
Mhm.
know you want to get to lunch too and probably do things. Are you out? Where are you at right now? Actually, where do you live?
Yeah, so I live in New York.
In the
I
city
just
or?
moved over to Jersey City. I was in the financial district,
Yep.
and I've enjoyed it. It's been wonderful over here. New York is a different animal, very busy place.
Yeah, I lived there in 2006, I think, for a whole year. It's fun, but very. I think I was what 23 at that time, so I don't think I could do that now at 40. Like I visited with my wife recently, and I was like, oh, this it's such a fun city. I'm never gonna live here ever. No. It's a different world. So I had a question, and right now I just lost my train of thought. But don't worry about it. It's all right. Oh, yeah, here we go. So I got it. So one thing we see is we have inequality, we have gender inequality, we have income inequality that goes not just gender but also social classes, different demographic issues. Do you find that financial planning can help individuals better, kind of see what their context is, or do you find that there is no way that financial planning can improve anyone's outcome, and you're going to be stuck on that social ladder, on the you're not going to go up. It's just that's it. You either go down or you stay. Does financial planning have a role to play in that?
Yeah, so we're seeing the middle class shrinking
Hmm.
in the United States, and we're seeing more people moving up than we are seeing going down.
Okay.
And it's important to understand that it's about a 3 to 1 or yeah, I think it's about a 3 to 1 ratio. For every three people going up, we have one person falling down.
Hmm.
So they're going from the middle class to lower middle class to this group going to the upper middle class. And it's important to understand that it's going to continue. It's going to continue. We had this pretty much absolute terrible event in the world with World War II, the Spanish flu, all of those things, Great Depression, that established the United States as the de facto
Yeah.
global superpower. Now, it took years to realize that. And then this massive spike in industrialization and the consumers.
Hmm.
So we now see consumerism that gave the United States astronomical amounts of power. So this idea that you could basically be a painter and then buy a house, raise a family, put your kids through school has it's gone away.
Hmm.
It's gone away and it's gone away. But that is the norm. So throughout most of history, the norm has been kind of the haves and have-nots.
Hmm.
And the problem with that is when it creates an inability to move up. So when you don't have social mobility, that becomes a huge problem.
Hmm.
I think a lot of places around the world, we do see, well, I shouldn't say around the world, within the United States and very developed countries, we do see an ability to move up. I think it is difficult and it's hard because some people are born on third base while you're just trying to struggle to get up to bat. And that's the other aspect is it everyone across all levels, their standard of living within the United States has gone up astronomically. Like
Hmm.
indoor plumbing, a lot of people now have streaming services, flat screen TVs. Even if you're in a trailer,
Yeah.
a lot of them still have electricity, plumbing. You have access to, even if it's mediocre, some form of healthcare. So we've seen these improvements that are happening, and they don't break evenly. And we're going to continue to see this top 10% do incredibly well,
Hmm.
and this middle group starting to continue to shrink, and then this bottom group of very disappointed and upset people who saw these group, who even perhaps they were bred to be in that group or their parents sent them to private
Yeah.
school, got them into best colleges, all of these things, to get up there, and they can make the leap. They can make the leap, but it's going to be difficult, and envy is going to play a big role in that as
Hmm.
well. I would say, was that quote the Bible, the love of money is the root of all evil. Key point is love there.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at it as an envy standpoint, we envy people. We don't like billionaires. Even if some billionaires are very altruistic and add a tremendous amount of value to society, for the most part, we don't like billionaires. And I think a lot of it has to do with that envy, even if perhaps they were a little aggressive and various other things.
Hmm. We
Um,
don't know. Yeah, it just
but yeah,
I find it's very much survivorship bias with billionaires or a lot of these exceptions because they are an exception, but not always because of they were exceptional, but mostly because they survived, to a certain level to reach a certain point. But no, it's a thing I find is
well, let me finish.
yeah. Go ahead, go ahead, go. Sorry.
Let me finish one point. Sorry, I want to
Yeah, yeah,
actually answer your question, and then I'm more than happy. So, to answer your question, at all levels, financial planning is applicable. I think we need some form of very, very cheap aspect. I was really disappointed when Mint.com shut down. I
mm,
think like some sort of budgeting, some type of credit card education, loan education,
yeah.
all of these things need to be at all levels, but it's incredibly, incredibly important because someone who doesn't have a lot of disposable income makes a financial mistake, it
Hmm.
can set them back for years. So
Under,
really, we need government checks in place to protect people at that lower level from exploitation. But
hmm.
then we also need some sort of education and some tech support as well. So it should be really easy with the technology. There should be government protections in place, as well as they should be educated enough to hopefully educated and empowered enough to be able to responsibly be able to manage their money at the lower level.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of move up the level, there needs to be more and more to
Well,
to it, and you know, because at some level you may be, if anything goes wrong, you're going to get, maybe you're on Medicaid and all of these things, so you don't
mhm.
have to worry about health insurance. But then once you move up a little, now you start have to pay for health insurance.
Yeah.
Well, there needs to be an education element. It needs to be technology supported, and then also protecting these people. So there has to be at every level
Hmm.
something, but it looks vastly different at all levels.
Yeah, yeah. You
So
hit the nail on the head in terms of like when someone doesn't have so much disposable income that their chan their chances of messing up big time is their margin of error is extremely reduced. I once used an example of a very idiot billionaire who can lose billions of dollars, and they're still a billionaire. But if one of us on the lower rungs, loses $1,000, then that's it. We're screwed. Like we're the precarity, the level of precarity is just so much higher. But and you're right about regulation. Like I find that is something missing a lot. But I find also one of them is kind of financial is kind of making finance sound complicated when it really often isn't. Is that because like everyone talks about financial literacy. One academic in Quebec actually said, the big problem is we're all talking about financial literacy, like teaching people about finance, but how come we can't just simplify finance? How come we can't just make it easier? So the Medicare, the what's that called? Sorry, the Social Security, or here in Quebec, in Canada, we have Canadian pension plan or Quebec pension plan. Kind of showing that it's being able to illustrate very clearly what could someone lose at taking their retirement at age 62 versus 65 versus 70, 71 here in Quebec. Um, Seems to be a missing piece, right? So can tech simplify financial decisions rather than just simply say, "Hey, here's literacy. Here's what you should learn, and here's a course about it." Like, is there a better way we can deliver financial simplicity?
yeah, so I 100%, and this isn't exclusive to financial planning. This is industries in general. They like to come up with terminologies and various other things for something that may be not that hard to understand
Yeah.
or even explain, but then we just create a word or whatever, or an acronym. Oh my gosh, the acronyms as well. So 100% from that aspect, but that's not uncommon among virtually all industries.
Yeah.
From a from what we've seen is people aren't all that interested in learning
Hmm.
finances. I think there are some who are incredibly interested, but on average, people aren't that interested and they're not that good at it.
Hmm.
And that's a problem. But what we've seen is a lot of success was defaulting. So we're going to default you into a target date fund and we're going to default you into saving a portion of your paycheck.
Yeah. So
We're
called
starting to see that evolve.
so-called
Go ahead.
nudging, or whatever it was that they called it. Cass Sunstein and what's his name? Uh, the Nobel Prize Thaler, Richard Thaler. I think he called it nudging, or kind of just leaving these defaults in place, and that way people at least default to something not so bad.
Yeah. So Sloma Bernarzi wrote the book Save More Tomorrow. And it's pre-committing a portion of your future raise towards retirement. So if you got a 3% raise, let's save additional 1%.
Hmm.
And we saw a lot of success with that. We're starting to see it evolve even further.
Hmm.
And that is kind of forcing people to make a decision. So we were going to default you into these things, but now we want to say you have to take this video training or whatever and now make a decision.
Hmm.
So we're not, you may not enjoy this, but I don't enjoy doing my taxes, but I still have to do it.
Yeah.
So you have to be informed on this and then make a decision. And that's going to be interesting because I think that's kind of, we started with defaulting and that's like the next evolution of it. The fundamental problem is always going to rely to, though, people are fighting for your dollars and cents.
Hmm.
And the easiest way to make astronomical amounts of money is to find a human bias and then try and exploit it. It's kind of like if you sell on losses, like, oh, the stock market's really volatile. You need to buy this annuity because I'm going to fix in and lock your income in for
Yeah.
life.
The human
So no
bias.
matter
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to exploit loss aversion on that aspect. So, you can do the opposite with opportunity cost. Oh, if you buy this annuity, you're foregoing so much upside on this. So that's the problem. It's easier to fight for someone's dollars and cents, and it's cheaper and more efficient to play on their behavioral bias
Hmm.
than to educate them and give them all the information, allow them to establish the box that you live in, and then you optimize within that box.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who are seeking financial advice are these money vigilant people. And we're just missing this huge demographic of individuals that, yeah, are underserved or not served and
Yeah.
are falling prey to these kind of biases. One example, this is not as relevant to financial planning, but I think gambling is going to be a huge problem among young men
Hmm.
because biologically we are unimpressive when we're young, but we have this overconfidence, and it was a mating strategy. So those were overconfident males when they were young reproduced, and then they reproduced and they reproduced, and all the ones who were underconfident got bred out. So there's this like window of overconfidence of young men
Yeah.
that we don't find in young women. And it's because they're unimpressive and they're in their prime mating years.
Hmm.
And back, in the 1200s, 1300s, this was very relevant, even earlier than that. That was very relevant and very important. And so we see that playing fast forwarding to today, where men are still this young, overconfident, slightly cocky,
Yeah.
young male aspect. gambling, we can exploit this overconfidence of young men and their ability to pick some sort of team to win or someone to score, whatever.
Hmm.
And then there's an addiction element to it. So
Of
we just
course.
have to offer promos after promo and
Yeah.
things and just
Gamify it, and
get them like three or four times.
and that,
And then we've got them.
yeah.
And I think we're going to see a massive spike in young male suicide because of it, because I
Mhm.
don't think they're going to reach out for help.
No, that's true.
And
As
so
long as
we're
we
going to see
stigmatize,
issues.
as long as we keep stigmatizing, mental health crises, that's not going to help out. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting observation that I never thought about, in terms of how today's gambling addictions, which is now only becoming easier with mobile gambling, sports betting, and Robinhood, which is kind of like sports gambling, sports betting, but without sports. And hearing, I mean, I don't know what the stats were, but I do understand that I remember some cases of suicide as a result of someone having massive losses and not knowing that they couldn't ask for help. And it was because we gamified gambling in a way. We made it easier, and and just increase the endorphin rush from winning. That, oh, we got to do another trade, or we got to make another bet. So I got to get going, but I wanted to really thank you for your time. And Colin, it was very, or Dr. Colin Slabach. What do you prefer? Sorry, it's fine.
Well, Colin's fine.
Yeah.
Colin's fine.
So
Even my students call me Colin,
Oh,
so it's
cool.
okay.
Cool. So, Colin, look, it's been an amazing time chatting with you. I love having these kind of elevated chats, and it's not just about a product or, it's actually about what can we be looking for? How can we improve the profession? And what are things that we should look out to? As you said, sports betting, or gambling in general is something that perhaps we as advisors should start looking into for our I don't mean I have this really good app for you to gamble with. It's perfect. It doesn't gamify gambling as much. No, but kind of be aware of what troubles could be happening to our clients, and how can we help them avoid it, and even be a place where we can kind of offer that safe space to them to say, hey, look, it's okay, that's normal. We gotta, but we can, you gotta ask for help.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. People definitely have to ask for help, especially young men. If you're going through something, you need to ask for help.
yeah.
There's nothing wrong with asking for help.
I've been there before. I've asked for help. I got it, and I am happy for doing that. It's something I think that more of us need to kind of just embrace, and it's okay. All right. Well, Colin, thanks a
Yeah,
lot for your
yeah,
time, and I hope you have a great week. Definitely definitely, let's follow and see how things go in the next future. In the near future, I hope to see you maybe next time at Edge, or will you be making an appearance?
say it again.
Will you be making an appearance at Edge next time?
I hope so. I
Yeah.
hope so. I haven't had that conversation with anyone yet, but I'll be around. I typically go to, I don't know, probably five, six, if not more, conferences a year. We're more settled at NYU. The program launch was all time consuming for a long time, but we'll probably see me at more conferences here
Yeah.
coming up in the next year.
All right, Colin. Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you soon at one of these conferences. So take care, and best of luck.
Definitely.
Have a good summer.